have the minutes of the previous meeting. May I have a motion to approve them? Or I should say, is there anything wrong with them?
No, nothing's wrong with them, and I move that we accept them.
I'll second.
In favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We'll start with the reports then to the board. And we will given the student government bill that's here. And we'll have your report first.
Test out the microphone for us.
Okay, sure, yeah.
You did a nice job last night, sir.
Oh, thank you. You said what was the microphone doing?
Is it on? Does it have a green light on there?
I thought it was microphone. Members of the board. Oh, there we go. Members of the board. Currently, the STA Service Committee is working on the mud run. That'll be on May 2nd, and that'll start at 11 o'clock a.m. And registration will begin at the location, so you can't register ahead of time, but you can pay when you get there, that kind of thing. We also are working on campus cleanup with with you guys, I believe, and the President's Cabinet and everyone else along those lines. And I believe we plan that towards the end of the month. Elections Committee, we moved our voting date to the 27th, and we currently have 20 applicants. And right now, we're going to close the application process on Friday, but we will still accept some afterwards in case we didn't meet our quota, I guess. Well, I guess we're aiming for 30, but 20 is a good number that we have right now, I think. Our diversity committee is currently working on Love Your Melon. I brought that up at last meeting. I have some more info on it now and some more flyers I can pass around to you guys. It is Love Your Melon's an organization to raise awareness for cancer. It's kind of an AIDS type of cancer thing. By selling things like hats, headbands, scarves, and that kind of thing, it'll just raise the awareness of the cancer. And so our diversity committee has put out a booth every once in a while to try to get people to want to donate to that kind of thing. And we also have a large banner that we're planning to put up at the Mud Run to raise more awareness for it. But I'll pass these around to you guys after I finish presenting. And then our outreach committee is currently working on our retreat day, and that will be planned for May 6th, I believe, 7th, somewhere around there. But yeah, any questions? Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bill.
Next report will be from the staff senate, and Candy Farrell's here to give that.
Well, staff senate is currently working on our staff retreat, which will be June 11th. We have finally contacted a couple speakers, but we haven't firmed anything up. We're also working with Seth Robbins in the faculty senate on the employee recognition reception, and we've got a initial contract with the Plains, but I need to do a little fine tuning on that, and so things are progressing with that. Our elections were supposed to be next month, but we've got nobody to nominate themselves or someone else for offices, so we're thinking we're going to take a year and reevaluate what our goal is as staff senate and whether we are providing a service for the staff of this community college. That's it. Any questions?
Faculty senate, Leah Noonan.
Good evening. I must say I'm shocked at what Candy just said. I would hate to see staff senate go away. And people feel the same way. As part of my report, we have sent out the final draft of the faculty job description to faculty. We should have the only comments so far we've had back have been positive, and if anything, there's been several little editing changes. This should be capitalized, that shouldn't, that type of thing. So by a week from Friday, we hope to have it turned over to, who do we turn it to? Jose? Oh, okay, I'll give it to Jose. Thank you. So, and that's all I have for right now. Any questions? Thank you very much.
The LCCEA, LCCC Education Association, Megan Kelly will give the report.
Thank you. Good evening. So I attended the WEA Delegates Assembly over the weekend, and we made a little bit of progress for higher education. We got 2 things added to the legislative platform in order for the EA lobbyists to be able to take those on. Those 2 platform pieces were to add a piece on scholarships, a need-based scholarships at the state level to sort of help augment with the Hathaway, to help some of our students. The hope would be to help some of our students, even though we already have some of that at the local level, but to have that at the state level for those students who have the need but maybe don't hit the level of merit and want to come and do a year of a technical program but maybe only had a 2.0 but still have the need base. So that was added to the legislative platform. The other piece specifically for higher ed that was added at this assembly was a piece that basically mirrors what happens with disability resources in the K-12. So K-12 at this point, they are reimbursed basically dollar per dollar for whatever resources they put out for disability services. So we had that added to the platform that for higher ed to have that same sort of reimbursement for disability services that we provide. We just think both of those things would be really positive for our students. So those were the big pieces as far as higher ed. The other piece for our members, for higher ed members, is a change in the due structure that allows for quarter time dues for members at the state level. And really that is a higher ed piece, even though it doesn't say that. It would allow our adjunct professors, so really it is for the community colleges, that our adjunct members would be able to become members at the lower price and still be able to have the professional development opportunities that are offered by the organization. And then the only other thing, this summer I'm scheduled to attend, they're having a higher ed summit for the state level in Jackson in July, and I'm planning to attend that. And I think some of the things that we're going to be looking at there are, again, looking at what the legislative platform is, looking at some of the pieces of wages, basically. I think we kind of remember the last big raises that came through, and that WEA was instrumental in getting some of that work done. So we're looking at what we can do to facilitate that. So, and I'm looking forward to it. I think the delegate assembly was great. We had higher ed meetings there, so I was able to talk to faculty from the other community colleges and really felt like it was a good experience. So, any questions?
I'm very sorry that you have to go to Jackson for a meeting
I know, it's gonna be rough.
in the middle of summer.
Yep.
We're going to have the 2016 budget reading now. This is the first reading and be given to us by Vice President Carol Hoagland and Budget Director Jane Myrick. I guess we could refer to it as the Carol and Jane show, but I see we have another person first.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, since you directed who should be presenting, I'd be happy to sit down. I just don't know if Carol and Jane would be all that happy. Lock that so I don't keep that. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'll actually start the presentation as I have in previous years, but Carol will cover some of the specifics regarding the different funds within the proposed budget. And I know Jane's here to offer her expertise and resources to answer your most difficult questions. Easy ones, Carol and I can handle. The difficult ones, we'll make sure Jane is available to do that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Even over there, good, okay. Mouse will do that. Great, Vicky saved us.
Again.
Indispensable. I thought I'd start off, as I've done in previous years, in talking about our budget process. This is one of the things I think that you as a board and certainly the college should be most proud of. 4 years ago, we had a budget process. I like to think that was in development, but clearly there was concerns and questions across the campus about the inclusiveness, the transparency associated with the budget process, as well as the opportunity to really get involved and help guide the allocation of the college's resources to the things that matter most, our strategic plan goals, our students, and the direct services that we provide to the community. This is the fourth year, essentially, of our new budget process, the fourth budget we prepared with that, and it just continues to get better. Both the involvement of a wide variety of individuals, not just individuals who are proposing their own budgets, but those individuals who are helping us make key decisions and frame where resources should be allocated, how to connect those to the strategic plan, to our key performance indicators. And I'm just very, very pleased with how that budget process continues to evolve. And we can certainly have Q&A about that, but I just would feel remiss if I didn't start off the conversation by saying this budget isn't a budget prepared by me, it isn't a budget prepared by Vice President Hoagland or Jane or just specific members of the executive team. This really is a budget prepared by this institution. So as I have in the past, and you'll see there's a memorandum at the beginning of your budget book, I like to start off with providing sort of the external context or the state context, because that plays heavily in how we consider our resources and our resource allocation. Unlike some of the other institutions or agencies of higher education in the state, there really was no mid-biennial supplemental budget impacts for the college. We did receive, as I think I've shared with you, a $5 million appropriation for endowment matching funds through the foundation. But in terms of actual supplemental budget allocation to the colleges, there really was nothing requested and nothing that was allocated for us. We do have the second year of our one-time legislative funding. These are our enrollment growth funds. I know you're all familiar with the enrollment growth funds. These come through an exception budget request, typically at the beginning of the biennium. And they are essentially requests to be funded for enrollment changes between the base year of 2004-2005 to the current year. We were successful going into this biennium and securing $14.3 million in enrollment growth funds. For LCCC, what that equated to is about $3 million for the biennium. Going into FY16, we will receive about $1.4 million. Now, one of the things that's different with these enrollment growth funds, and it was for the current year that you're in, is that they are being appropriated based on successful course completions. So basically, the volume of courses at each college that have, or volume of course enrollments at each college where students pass. So a passing grade, a C or better. And that's how they looked at each campus and said, what volume does LCCC have? What volume does Casper have? And then these $14.3 million are essentially divvied up based on those course completions. And then going into this year, we have about 20.3% of all the successful course completions. So we get a fair share of those enrollment growth dollars. There is no state-supported pay increase going into this biennium. As you recall, there was a significant conversation leading up to the biennial budget. The community colleges did receive a 2% going into FY15, and that will continue through next year, but there is no additional increase. Whereas the University of Wyoming received, I believe, a 2.5%, and then this year they'll receive a 2.5%. And I believe K-12 received something similar, a 2% and a 2%. I'll come back to the conversation about pay adjustments here later on in my comments. And then the last thing here, we did receive some funding for the planned increase to the employee retirement. The employer's share of the employee's retirement, it equates to an increase of 0.75%. From the commission level, as many of you know, there is no tuition adjustment or increase this year. I applaud the commission for taking some time to really think about and examine their tuition setting policies. And they're having conversations and doing research right now, trying to determine ways in which they may or should change their tuition setting policies, as well as modeling some innovative ideas about tuition programs that would freeze tuition for students who stay continuously enrolled full-time through completion, and other ways that they might be able to use tuition to really encourage completion. We do have an increasing component of performance funding. I believe many of you know we're sort of in a phase-in period of increased performance funding. Performance funding is only really allocated based off of our variable funding. So within our state model, just as a reminder, and for Trustee Barker, who's new, we receive fixed cost funding, funding that essentially supports those things that are fixed. Regardless if we have one student or we have 10,000 students, we need a financial aid director, we need a registrar's office, we need so many facilities. So we receive 60% of our allocation based off of fixed expenses, and then 40% that's based off of variable expenditures. And those are mostly, as you can imagine, associated with fluctuations in enrollment and thus fluctuations within the instructional resources and instructional activities at the colleges. We have been moving down this road to see larger percentages of that variable funding allocated based on performance. So 2 years ago, 10% of that 40% was allocated based on completion or retention rates in courses. So course retention rates. Those students, or the rates at which students completed courses successfully. Going into this year, it raised to 15%. Next year, it goes to 20%. So 20% of that 40% is being allocated based on successful course completion. Now they are using two measures. One is a completion rate, and the other one is a completion volume. So rates are essentially what percent of the students across LCCC that enrolled completed successfully. The volume is the actual numbers of students that complete successfully. And we've really been pushing more for, if we're going to stick with this metric, the volume makes more sense. And any of you who enjoy math in the room, you can have an 80% success rate on 20 students. And you can have a 70% success rate on 1,000 students. So which one's the bigger number? So the volumes make a lot more sense. And I'm proud to state that we've been doing a lot of work on campus in terms of retention of students, getting them to complete their courses successfully. And our course completion rates and volumes continue to increase. And as a result, we'll see about $364,000 of additional revenue based on that. And if you recall, in the past, we've been losing revenue, giving it away to other campuses. So we're really doing some good work here on campus. Local appropriations, this is the good news and the bad news. As we look at local valuation and appropriation, we estimate that we'll see about a 10% increase, which should result in just shy of $500,000 in new revenue. Unfortunately, because of the state model and the way we do what's called recapture and redistribution, as those fluctuations change and if valuation goes down in Chicago County, then they recapture revenue, so we actually will end up losing $500,000 back to the state model. So it's close to a wash with that. So then we look inside in the institutional context here. So what are we doing inside? We estimate going into FY16 that there will be about $2.5 million available for essentially investment and reallocation. And it's a message we've been carrying to the campus that even if the state isn't providing additional revenue, even if there aren't those additional revenue sources, we still have to find ways to free up resources to invest in the things that are priority for the institution. Now, 1.4 million of that is the one-time enrollment growth funding, and so we are treating that as one-time funding for the most part. We did put in here this just to show that in terms of external funding, we actually have to absorb about a $500,000 reduction. But we were, through a variety of mechanisms, able to identify 1.6 million of internal or existing funds that we can essentially reallocate. And I want to talk about some of the things that we are doing this year that are different than what we've done in the past to help us with that. The first one is what we're calling vacancy replacement savings. And I've explained this, I believe, to the Facilities and Finance Committee. I want to just touch on it briefly again, and certainly we can have questions when we get through the presentation. In any given year, we budget for 100% employment. So we budget for and plan that every employee, every position will be fully filled and paid for over the course of 12 months. Now, we know, though, that in any given year, we have vacancies occur. We have retirements, we have people leave, we have people come. We know that on average, it takes us about 45 days to fill a vacant position. And so what happens is, while those positions are vacant, there's resources that are committed to that position that aren't being spent. And so over the course of the year, those resources continue to pile up, and then we get towards the end of the fiscal year, and certainly at the end of the biennium, and then we're talking about, okay, what about these resources that we have to spend? And we're sort of in a reactionary mode in talking about spending those resources. What we've done this year and what we've asked Jane to do is model based off of over the past decade or so, what percent of our personnel, what percent of our staffing on an annual basis is essentially vacant during the course of the year. And I think it's about 3% is what the calculation was. And then I asked Jane, so what would be a very conservative and a safe estimate of what percent we might be able to utilize as we move forward? So what we've planned within this budget is a vacancy savings of about 1.4%. Is that right, Jane? You're nodding. So not the 3%, because there will be those fluctuations. And what this allows us to do is take $450,000 that would likely be there at the end of the year, at the end of the biennium, and plan to use it more proactively at the beginning of the year. So that actually brings funding into the FY16 budget at the front end instead of thinking about what we need to spend it at the tail end. Now, there are risks with that, as anybody will point out. There could come that time where we have 100% employment for the full 12 months, and then we would have committed $450,000 that isn't there. But as James pointed out, looking historically through us, even with fluctuations in vacancies, 1.4% is probably a fairly conservative number. We'll actually probably end up with additional revenue at the end of the year. But we're trying to really use these resources more purposefully. The second piece I want to point out is the change to our technology fee structure. As you know, and I believe you share my position on this, I believe it should be difficult for us to increase fees and difficult for us to increase tuition to our students. Sometimes it's all too easy and too quick to say, oh, we need additional money. We'll make Keenan open up his checkbook and pay a little bit more. And so for the last 3.5 years, we have held fees flat. And of course, we've championed many years to the commission to not raise tuition. Going into this year, as we started looking at it, we have the first real good picture on fee revenues and fee expenditures. So as faculty, as managers, as staff were preparing budgets this year, if they had fees associated with their budgets, they could actually see what the fee associated with their courses or their program had been generating in previous years. And then look at the expenditures for the things we're supposed to be spending those fee revenues on. And so we're still developing the process, but it really gave us a good look. And as I've said to the staff here, there will come a time in which we may need to increase fees or increase tuition, but we want to be able to stand up in front of Bill, stand up in front of Keenan, and look them in the eye and say, this is why, and this is what it's going to do for you. And so this year, we did bring them a request for a fee increase. And so what we've done, as we've looked at the technology structure, there's a couple of things happening. We have a technology structure. Current fee is called a high-tech fee. It's basically levied on every credit with no cap, $10 a credit with no cap. And it's loosely was defined and developed to help us pay for the increasing costs of maintenance of technologies and the increase or additions of technologies. But we've really had a lot of fluid movement of expenditures based on how much that fee generated. It really wasn't truly connected to all of those expenditures. We've also had an online course fee. So for every online course, fully online, each credit students would be charged $10 per credit. And we really looked at how the incorporation of our learning management system and other technologies into the classroom have changed. It used to be that it was only the online classes that had a learning management system shell. Desire to Learn, D2L, is our learning management system. Now that shell or that capability is in every class, and students are using it even if it's a face-to-face class. Faculty are using it even if it's a face-to-face class. And that's just one example. So the online fee has also become antiquated. And what we've developed and what we actually have moved through the process is to replace those and create two different technology fees. A student technology fee. And that fee is associated with those technologies or those technologies that directly impact or touch students, or those technologies that support people that directly impact those students. So student technology fee, the Desire to Learn learning management system is a great example. It's a technology tool that facilitates the learning and students directly interact with. Our Starfish early alert system is a tool that helps our advisors work with students directly to be able to make sure that they are receiving the support and advice as needed to keep them retained and keep them on a successful track. The other fee is what we call the technology infrastructure fee. This is for the infrastructure to provide an educational environment that students demand or really require. And so the best example I can give you in this case is the wireless network. We have to put networking elements, we have to put wireless access points, all those things. Students come and they expect, or how many devices do you have, Keenan? Two? Always only two. Bill, you probably, how many do you have? You have 5 or 6, I bet. No, 2. I happen to have 4. But students come to us and they expect that every device connects to the internet and they have internet access everywhere they walk and everywhere they go. Well, those points have to be replaced. The service requirements and service agreements for the software that runs those things have to be upgraded. And we've really watched over the past 4 years as those technology costs have increased and increased. We feel we can track both types of expenditures and actually illustrate the costs and how they directly intersect with the students. And so we also, as you recall, implemented a new procedure and policy in regards to student fee increases. It used to be in the past, it was kind of ambiguous how they were developed, how they would be vetted. The new procedure requires that we take proposed changes or increases in student fees to Student Government Association and the College Council. So it becomes a much more transparent process. We did that with the students. We did do that with College Council. College Council recommended the approval of this new structure, and Cabinet approved that as well. So that's a big piece. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I wanted you to understand and hear sort of the diligence we put into consideration of fee adjustments and really what's been happening with technology and why this was really required as we go into this year. A couple of other slides I've shared within the past just to go through. You've all seen this graph. It's our enrollment fluctuations over the past years. This is where we're at here. I'm not sure where we'll end up this year, but I think even as the most current reporting, we've actually flattened out, if are not slightly up, for spring semester. So as we've seen in the past with these dips, we're hoping that we'll start to see that correction here. And there's some indication with high school numbers. And of course, with the changes in the energy industry, we may see some of that correct itself. And certainly the good work that faculty and staff are doing on campus right now. I've shared with you, just as comparators, revenue per student, LCCC compared to the average Wyoming revenue. This basically looks at how much money do we have to spend per student FTE. And we have tended to be below the average, and this year we've kind of just touched right on the average. Some of that has been because of the enrollment decreases that aren't proportionate across the state. The other reason really is the fact, and the reason we've mirrored it so closely, is that between Casper and LCCC, we kind of set the average. We have a majority of the enrollments. And so we're always going to kind of mirror that. Revenue distribution. If you can see, this is somewhat of a change. Our tuition and fees per student FTE are actually higher. Part of that is a volume thing. We just have more students. This is a shift though. Prior, in fact, last year, I believe in the previous years, we actually received less state appropriation per student FTE than the average in Wyoming. Some of this is a function of the model being recalibrated, and some of it is a function, again, of enrollment changes and how that impacts the model. Local appropriations, we actually receive less per student FTE, and then other fees, we receive slightly less than other FTE. Expenditures, fairly similar tracking, although you'll see some fluctuations in here because of the influence of a variety of different funding activities and expenditure activities that are associated. If we bring money from the fund balance into an operating budget, you'll see some fluctuation that's not perfectly correlated to revenues that we receive in that year. And then comparative expenditures for FTE by program. We talk a lot about program, and I don't mean by the computer science program or by the business program. I mean by these functional programs. So again, in the state, we tend to spend more on instruction than the Wyoming average per student FTE, which is a good thing. That's what we want to continue to see. Public service about flat. Academic support, we spend more. Student support, by the way, these are FY14, so they're going to be a little bit of a lag. Student services, we've spent less, but with the investments this year and the new advising model, my guess is we will come flat, if not slightly up. Institutional support, less. Plant operations, slightly more, and then scholarships, we've been on par, but slightly less. So when I talk about the operating budget, and that's where I kind of want to move into now, I talk mainly about those funds that are truly unrestricted. They're for us to operate on within an annual year. And so the big piece is the unrestricted fund, or what we call the general fund. And then a significant component is the 1 mil. This is the permissive 1 mil levy that you have to act upon every 2 years. That allows you to levy an additional 1 mil on the local district to provide resources to support the college. When we've tracked just changes by expenditures by program by both of those funds, we try to look at where the investments are going, and our goal is to see investments in instruction, academic support and student services, and scholarships, those things that really directly impact the students. Going into this year, you'll see some things that are, apparently concerning a decrease in the investment in instruction. Two major things are actually impacting that. The first one is the fact, for the first time, I think, in many years, we're not investing all of the enrollment growth funds, the $1.4 million, into instructional areas. In fact, last year, I think we spent more than $300,000 in instructional area specific. This year, it's going to be maybe $62,000 that'll go to instructional areas. I think that's fairly close. And I'll tell you why we're not putting those in there. And so the influence of those one-time only funds will shape this. You put $1 million in here and things change real quick. But what you want to look at and draw your attention to is this percent change and what's happening over time and how are we sticking it. So this is a 1-year fluctuation. As enrollment increases, I think we'll see some adjustments there. The other thing influencing this is that we have reduced the adjunct budgets this year significantly. And that's a result of really addressing the enrollment changes. So for the past couple of fiscal years, enrollment has slid, at least last year, but we left adjunct budgets, part-time faculty budgets, essentially the same. And so again, if we're not utilizing them, it locks up resources at the end of the year that we have available. But when you reduce those budgets, you're going to see some of that here. Public service is a small amount. You can see a slight reduction in there, and we're pretty consistent with some of that. These are a lot of our supportive outreach activities and lifelong learning. Academic support is a shift down here, and I know Dr. Fierro would like to point out that he's taking it for the team, I think, with some of that. Some of this is also shuffling of where the technology expenditures are landing up as well. But again, this is not the trend that we want to see, and certainly not over time. But it's one of the things that we did as we sort of shuffled expenditures this year. And so how real that is. Academic support also tended to receive a significant component of, or chunk of the enrollment growth one-time funds that we would allocate, again, because we reduced the allocation of one-time funds this year, not as much went into academic support, so you see that variation there. Student services is an increase here, relatively flat, consistent, but we've been investing, trying to catch up there, and I'll talk a little bit about student services investments. Institutional support is slightly down. Operation and maintenance is slightly up, and I'll talk about why that is as well. This is where we're sort of budgeting that one-time only enrollment growth funds this year. And scholarships slightly up for this year, but actually our long-term trend is slightly down. But we're feeling pretty good with the scholarship program and the scholarship structure right now. So that's your dashboard to sort of gauge where we're spending our operating budgets. And again, what we want to see are increases in instruction and increases in academic support and student services. This year, because we have $1.4 million of variable funds in the mix, and we're not putting those all into there for one-time investments, you're seeing a lot of that fluctuation. Just comparative, again, I guess you can see this in the budget book. It just shows current fiscal year 15, proposed 16. In regard to allocation by program, you can see the slight reduction in instruction from 41.29 to 40%, and changes in the reductions there. I won't go through all of those, but I want to, in your budget book, you also have the comparators by LCCC to the other community colleges. Is that in there as well? I don't think we have a slide for that up here, but what page is that on? On page 9 in your budget book, it's really something I would encourage you to look at. So one of the things that we look at, and I'd encourage you as a board to look at on that page 9, is are we really out of whack with what the other 7 or 6 community colleges are doing? You know, are we spending significantly less in instruction, significantly more in student services, and looking at where they're at? You'll see there's quite a bit of variation across the 7 community colleges, but what we look for is if we're going to be out of alignment with them, especially in instruction, student services, and academic support, we want to be spending more in those areas than they are. And you'll see, I think we're probably right in the middle. Some are spending less, others are spending more, but we're doing pretty well there, I think. And then this just quickly, we do as we do every year, budget requests come in and we align those and say, how is this impacting our strategic plan? This gives you a quick look of how the budget's allocated by our strategic plan goals and strategies. Not surprisingly, a significant chunk of it, almost 43%, is going to that first goal of getting our students to complete an academic credential. We also ask folks to align their budget requests to improvements to our key performance indicators. So this is our big institutional dashboard of how we're doing. And interesting, as we've seen in the past, a significant investment in academic preparation, developmental education, preparing people, in student participation and achievement. So this is dealing with enrollments, recruitments, completions, as well as workforce development and transfer. But this just gives you an idea of sort of how our expenditures on campus, planned expenditures, are aligned with moving the needle on our key performance indicators. So let me start wrapping up my part here just by going through these, what we call budget assumptions, but it essentially goes through and delineates what we've moved through in terms of what we believe funding available will be and what we're going to plan to do with those funds in this budget. New funds available, as I walked through earlier, we're seeing about a $500,000 reduction because of recapture redistribution. Local valuation is up. We almost gained that back. Course completion funding is up because more of our students are completing their courses. This is the state's share of the employee retirement contribution. We are still modeling what we saw as the decrease in tuition revenues for this year. So this isn't proposing that enrollment's going to drop again, we're going to lose $900,000. It's readjusting what we had planned for tuition revenue this year and what we've actually seen. So we've seen about 11.4% reduction in what we planned for tuition revenue. Now, some of that will move as you go through your second reading of the budget and as we get closer to the end. And of course, if enrollment increases, this is a completely different story as we go into FY16. Again, some fee reductions based on enrollment as well. So this is where you see what we're planning for base reductions or money that we simply don't have available and we'll have to accommodate for going into the year. Internally, as I said, vacancy savings, vacancies replacements, about 500,000. This is just the adjustments of when we have people leave and there's fluctuations in whoever is hired after them in terms of their wages, or when we have vacancies that go vacant and we say we're not going to fill them, we're going to put them back in so that those can be reallocated. And so that's about $500,000. This is the vacancy savings piece I talked about, 450,000. The restructure of the IT fee, it's about 500,000. And the adjunct retirement budget, this is just taking something off the books. We had in the past where a few adjuncts were actually covered under Wyoming retirement system, and WRS told us you can't do that. And so we've actually had to adjust for it, but we've had a few folks we've committed to, so we've carried that contribution on our books. But this is essentially going away, and so we'll have about $150,000 savings there. The one-time only funds, this is the enrollment growth funding as I talked about, but you can see at the bottom then what we have, kind of an angle, so I'll go over here. About $1 million for base or ongoing commitment reallocation, and about $1.4 million in one-time only funds. So what are we going to do with it? As in the past, we've planned for educational advancements. These are things when people advance in their education, they get a master's degree, a doctorate, a bachelor's degree, we increase their compensation when they make those advancements. And we've been pretty good with about $45,000, $50,000 over the past few years, but that's our best guess based off of modeling. This is the employer retirement contribution. Remember, you saw, if I go back here, we received $82,000 from the state. The actual cost is $134,000 that we have to do that because the state funds only 60% of these programs because we receive 60% of our funding from the state, 20 locally and 20 from students. So we have to pick up that other share. And then short-term disability insurance. This was a new benefit that we implemented halfway through this year. So we had budgeted for half of the premium. Going into next year, we have to now budget for the other half. So that's an increase of about $42,000. Academic affairs through the human resource prioritization process, we'll be adding in 3 instructors, 3 new instructor positions. And then the operating budget does change by about $67,000, and some of that is a fluctuation of where those IT expenditures actually show up. Student services, we have 1 position, a career resource specialist. I believe we currently have a career resource specialist that is on grant funds. As in the past, you've heard some of the trustees say, we don't want to see the approach where we essentially take grant funded positions and after the money runs out, just move them into the current fund. We want to make sure that we're not making those commitments without due diligence and really evaluating those positions. And the way we structured our human resource prioritization process, it requires those positions to go through the process. And this is one of those cases where the career resource specialist was requested, was scored, was ranked, and came out fairly well. The operating budget, you'll see a big increase here, and I just want to explain why there's such a big increase in student services. There's a couple of main reasons. The first one is that we're taking about $140,000 of funding that used to be paid for by the students, so their student fee revenues. And if you remember, it's probably 2 budgets ago, we had students come to us and say, as we've looked at how we allocate those student fees, we recognize that a significant amount of money is going to fund college-driven student activities. So activities where we hire staff and assign them to do specific events. And they said, shouldn't those really be within the college's operating budgets? So many of our equine teams, for example, where we hire faculty and pay them to run these programs. And so we said we agree. And so this year we took $140,000 off the students' revenue and said we need to put that in our operating budget. Now, it doesn't mean we won't ask them to be generous if we athletic teams that are, or even the ranch horse team, or those that end up in postseason play or national types of competitions. But it was really trying to say, let's use the revenue in the operating budget instead of asking student fees, student activity monies to fund these things. So that's a big piece within the student services increase. The other thing is as we've implemented a much more structured Title IX investigation process, as a requirement of changes to federal law, we've had to figure out ways to actually compensate people that do very timely and very intimate investigations and their training. And so there's a budget increase there as well for Title IX related requirements that we have to adjust. So some increase in student services that make up that big chunk there with students, and I just wanted to point those things out. Under the president, we were president and trustees. Your budget is in here as well. We were frugal and actually reduced our operating budget. The Albany County campus also had a reduction. A lot of this is related to just reductions in their adjunct faculty lines. Institutional effectiveness, this is Dr. Bender's area. This is another position that went through the process. It's a project management coordinator, and I shared a little bit this with the Facilities and Finance Committee, because this is a new position at our campus. But one of the things that we've been tracking is we've had significant conversations about communication, evaluating the data associated with our employee satisfaction surveys. I'm looking at, and there are a couple of things that seem to emerge in every one of those. One deals with change and how change is managed and facilitated here. And the other one deals with how we communicate consistently about change and those types of actions. And one of the areas we've been working on, they were in my personal goals, as well as some of the executive team goals, is creating a structure in which we can manage change more strategically and more cohesively. And so we've been developing a project management process at the campus that provides a consistent structure of how we approach major institutional change. But one of the things we recognize is outside of, I think, our chief technology officer and the business analyst and student services, we don't have anybody that really understands and can devote the time to project management and change management. And as we implemented that structure, that's where this position really came from. It's going to help the campus create the capacity to better navigate change, to better communicate what we're doing, be more consistent in the way we approach significant institutional changes. So very intriguing. It's one of those things that's somewhat of a risk. But we're seeing these types of positions now pop up more and more in education. And a lot of it's just a response to the fact that when we shifted from sort of an access focus to a completion focus and all those data came in, it required a significant amount of change. And they realized that we're not always real good at facilitating change. Administration and finance, you'll see an increase there. And that's predominantly related to the typical things that fluctuate: utilities increases and insurance increases, and things that are somewhat out of our control. Construction expenses. So this is where $910,000 of that one-time only funding is going to. And this is a shift. Normally, we would have used this for one-time only allocations that people could compete for across the campus. But over the past 3 years, we've had anywhere from $500,000 to almost $750,000 last year that we've really put on the table for one-time only expenditures. So we've gotten a lot of stuff, and we've really gotten a lot of the equipment upgrades and the things we've had done. Going into this budget year, you know that we're sort of still on somewhat unpredictable ground with our two construction projects, the Student Services University Center and our Flex Tech building. We've set that aside and essentially said, until those things, bids are let and given, and we get those things under construction, let's put that money there in case we need it for those two projects. Now, if the bids come in favorably, something happens and we really get favorable bids and we get them under construction, that money may yet be in play this year to do other things, either other facilities projects or to reinvest. But going into this year, we said, let's put it there in case we need them because of the unpredictability of the construction market right now. That's what's driving that increase in that plant budget that I showed you on that graph, and really why there's a shift then between instruction academics. We've put $1 million almost into an area we typically would not put $1 million into. And then in operating service, we've done in the past, and $250,000 in our operating reserve. Before I turn it over to Carol, the one thing I said I wanted to come back to is talk about employee compensation and employee pay plans. Going into FY16, right now, the estimated increase just for CPI inflationary purposes is about 2.1%, and that's more of a regional estimate. My understanding is Laramie County will actually see a higher inflationary metric going into this year. So what does that mean for us and our employees is we're going to see a cost of living adjustment for our employees. The other piece, and the one that I'm really more focused on right now, is that our insurance rates for the first time in quite a few years are going up significantly. I want to say 14 or 16%. Our employees have to bear a portion of that increase. We do not have state funding for a compensation plan. We've been talking with the other campuses across the state, and they're at various stages in planning, but at this point it sounds like about 3 of them are essentially proposing across the board adjustments, varying from 1%, 2%, and then 2.5%. The other campuses are sort of where we were at when we started this, that we would focus on those mandatory adjustments. Market market or equity adjustments, and educational advancements as we've done in the past. I believe, and again, this is something that we will have to live with if we make that decision, I believe that we could find a way to accommodate a modest increase. Certainly, we could find a way to do a one-time bonus. Now, there's pros and cons to both. The ongoing base increase, or if we adjusted all the salary schedules up by 1%, let's say, would have about a $230,000 impact to the campus's budget. It would adjust them. And 1% may not sound like a lot, but I tell you what, when our employees have to look at those other increases, every little bit helps. We could find a way to do that. We could find a way to do a one-time incentive, I think, as well. I don't know if the incentives are as meaningful or as impactful, but it is something that we could look at doing. We've also talked about doing an early incentive or an early comp, say a 1% adjustment, setting specific completion goals. And if we have more students complete, then it would go to reason we'd have more students retained and probably more students enrolled to adjust those completions up. And with that comes additional tuition revenue we haven't modeled. So we could put a 1% at the end of the fiscal year that could go to the campus if we met those goals. Now, the risk about doing a compensation adjustment. So many of you going into this biennium remember the legislative conversation. I likened to it, or hearkened to it earlier, right? We went in and asked for pay adjustments. And the governor came back and said two things to us. I don't have consistent and clear data across the 7 colleges. You need to give me something consistent because you're comparing apples to oranges to pomegranates to bananas. I don't know what this is. And the other piece is they looked across the colleges, and the colleges had been giving pay adjustments across the board. And so the governor and the legislature said, well, if you can do that already, do you have the resources to make those adjustments? And of course, our arguments are realistic. You recall we gave a 2.5% in the last year of the previous biennium. And we did it specifically as a cost of living adjustment. And finding that 2.5% was not easy. People had to cut operating budgets. We had to look for efficiencies. We had to do it. But we did it because we know that it meant the best for our faculty and staff. That message always doesn't play well in the legislature. So as we go into the legislature, our worry is that they say, see, they did it again. They've made compensation adjustments. They don't need a pay plan. And so, while it's wonderful to hear that the EA is going to make this may be part of their legislative agenda or have that conversation, I worry that we may be setting ourselves up for, a bigger debate. Now, I may be overcautious, and I think we have a compelling argument regardless. And I think we need to go and ask for those types of adjustments. We are working on trying to get consistent salary data, although it's a work in progress, I would say. But as we wrap up this conversation, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you think would be in the best interest of the college to do in regards to employee compensation. Without a doubt, we could do a 1% incentive one-time payment right now. We could probably do that out of carryover funds from the current fiscal year. We could probably, and maybe we should, do an incentive type of thing for increased completions, and if those completions do result in additional tuition revenue, and do one at the end of the year. And with certain risks, but prudent planning, we could probably find a way to do a 1% adjustment across the board. But it does come with those risks depending on what we enter into in the next biennium. So chew on that. Let's let Vice President Hoagland walk through the different fund summaries. I'll hang out up here and then we'll have a conversation.
I have the next round of funds. Sure. Okay, so as Dr. Schaefer indicated, the One Mill Fund is the fund that we are trying to keep liquid, and in the past, we had some ongoing operating expenses over there when times were short. And with the board's directive, they asked us to try and move those back to the base budget in the unrestricted fund and to try to keep this more liquid for the development of the strategic plan. So over the last couple of years, we were able to do that. And so all the Eastern Laramie County campus We have, all the other things are now, one-time expenditures and not base requests. So in this fund, what we'll be doing is, if you'll recall, the criteria for what we could fund major maintenance projects, changed a little bit when the oversight went to the construction management division, and we were a little bit short for things like, sidewalk repair and, parking lot maintenance and things like that. So we had to come up with funding for us to be able to continue to do just the maintenance on those, areas. And so we've got 500,000 budgeted there. Last year, we had $200,000 in innovation funds. We've had, several projects that have moved through the innovation funds, and at this point in time, we did not want to completely eliminate the effort in innovation, but to reduce it some. So we've reduced that to 100,000. And then, as I mentioned, the ongoing expenses for the Pine Bluffs campus is at $110,000. Then, in last year, the budget for facility planning was about 275,000. We have met most of our planning needs at this point in time until we actually update our strategic plan and our facility master plan. And so we didn't need quite as much in facility planning going into this next year. We have funded the professional development, employee development fund out of 1 mil, and that's maintaining the 75,000 that we currently invest in employee development. And then last year, we centralized our equipment repairs and replacement budget in the 1 mil, and it was about 100,000. And this year, we reduced it a little bit because we weren't quite spending it there. So this is our liquidity fund, and we're using it for mostly one-time expenditures. Okay, the auxiliary fund is dedicated to campus services. And so some of the things that we do in the auxiliary fund are our food service, our residence hall, student housing, our bookstore, our Children's Discovery Center is there, and then our facility rental program is accounted for in this fund. And so there was a slight increase, sorry, I didn't mention pages, but that's on page 26. We've had a slight increase there, and it's mostly we've increased the subsidy that we give to the Children's Discovery Center by about $30,000. That's still a little bit short of what they need for their operations, but one of the things that we are doing going into this year, thanks to Vice President Fierro, is that one of the classrooms that wasn't getting quite as much use, he's allowed us to take that classroom over. And so we'll have one of our biggest needs at the child care center that the parents are looking for is pre-K program. So we'll have one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And so that will help offset some of the deficit for the Discovery Center. And the other thing the subsidy helps us do is provide a place for our students to go to get some lab experience. So they've been doing a really good job at expanding the number of students that go through that center, and it becomes part of their instructional program. So beyond the early education program and the psychology, sociology, PE students, so there's lots of students that actually go through there and watch our children, work with our children. And so it's becoming a much stronger component on the instructional side of the house. And so we want to be able to maintain, a good quality faculty there and a good program for the students that are cared for as well. Let's see. And the 5 mil is just in there because the trend data is still out there from 2 years ago. Next year that will drop off, assuming that we don't go out for a 5 mil election, but that really there's nothing happening in there. It's just that it is still in the trend data. Okay, for the restricted fund, these are funds that are restricted by an external source, an outside source. So this is where we keep our federal funds, our state grants that are specific to a certain activity that they want us to do. You'll see an increase there as well. And the largest increase has to do with our direct loan program and our Pell Grant. So that's up about 2 million there. And then we always try to build in a little bit for grants that we're working on that that may come due or come forward. We get them in the next year, so there's a little bit of growth in there. The endowment fund is down from the year before, but not completely, because as President Schaefer said, we did get some matching funds. We didn't budget for the entire amount because we anticipate it'll be over a 2-year period that we'll actually be able to match those funds, I guess, gain the donations to match. But that was actually a very wonderful thing, and people seem to be very excited to be able to have their funds matched when they give it to the foundation. And then, of course, all of those funds are invested, so the balance of that's the investment income that we anticipate receiving. The plant fund is where we keep all of our long-term assets, so all of our inventory, all of the building inventories and equipment inventories are accounted for in this fund. And then we also have our debt service for our bonds, and then all of our construction projects that are going on are housed in this fund. Okay, and this one is down a little bit from the prior year because some of the funding that we received from the GO bonds is now not in new revenue, but it's dropped down to carryover. So we're continuing to spend that. And then we have some state appropriation.
Hello, I'm here. Okay, thank you.
About time.
And so the numbers are still pretty big in there, but they kind of moved around from last year because of they're not new money now, they're in the carryover. And then all of our major maintenance funding is in this, because that's where we account for our projects. And then the contingency reserve, the major maintenance funding that we receive on a biennium basis, the contingency reserve, or totally bonus money, is, as the director of facilities calls it, is an annual appropriation. So that's about $300,000. Hi, Bill.
I just would like to ask, is the money in this fund for the reparations that we're doing for the library, the physical athletic building and the signage outside, are those funds in this grouping?
Yes and no. The for the PE building and the Learning Commons, both of those went through the legislative process for authorization in this last legislative session. We actually have not received funding and didn't actually ask for funding in the authorization. So it would be no to that part. And then what was the third one?
Signage.
Signage, yes. So signage, yes, is in here. The wayfinding, quick update on that is that we received bids. It's gone out to bid opening. We've received 5 bids. The cost ranged from about $320,000 to $580,000, and so that was real favorable because we were hoping to keep it under $500,000. We're still working with them because some of the bids were deficient, so we're still gaining some additional information on that. But we will be starting the wayfinding, the construction on that, and that should be finished hopefully by the end of August for our first phase. Now, we won't get all the signage up because we're doing it in phases, and then we have to kind of steer clear of the area that's going to be under construction for the next couple of years. But yes, that's where this would be housed.
When will we hear about the library and physical education facilities?
Okay, so we have started 3 new level 1 plans. One of them is an update to the Learning Commons. And if you'll recall, we decided to increase the size of that project and take it back for additional funding, or ask for state support on that. And then the second one was a residence hall and a child discovery center. And the third one is the fine and performing arts. So in your May 6th meeting, we'll be bringing those forward to you for authorization for us to start them through the legislative process. So they'll go to the commission in June. If you approve all of that, they'll go to the commission in June, and then on to the State Building Commission in October, and then through the legislative process for authorization. All two of those we'll be asking for state support on. Obviously, the residence hall isn't eligible for state support, but we do have to have authorization from the state to be able to build those.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Vice Chair, may I, long as you brought the subject up about the physical education, level 2 planning, we got the authorization to move forward from legislature, but where do we have the yes money to do the planning? Where is it in the budget?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, both with that one and the learning commons, some of the revenues that exist for those sit in with the foundation. The additional revenues have yet to either be raised or allocated within this budget. And that's why I pointed out that $900,000 of one-time funds. If they're not needed for the current projects, that frees some of that revenue up. We're also in conversations with students. I know Keenan and others have taken interest in supporting the physical education building expansion. So we're working on other revenue sources. At this time, those are not modeled in this budget.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, the items you just listed are low priority for the $910,000 for construction money. The construction money is $910,000. I don't know if it's $910,000, $900,000 plus, is to deal with the two new buildings. And if we have a good fortune and their dollars continuing, that in the next fiscal year, dollars would come forward for the library planning and also for, oh, you said we're gonna go to the legislature for the library. But I'm still
Yes.
curious about where we're gonna have the PE remodeling.
The $900,000 would be spent in this fiscal year. It would be freed up potentially for buildings like the PE remodeling. But the two things that we have to work on first, one, we need to get an athletic director hired so that we can actually have somebody to go through that. And then two, we need to get these bids in. The bigger question though isn't always necessarily the money. So even in the best case scenario, we get both of those projects come in, low bids, we're under construction, and that $900,000 that play, we still have to navigate the issues of having enough staff resources and time to take on yet another major construction project all within this year. So we have legislative authorization, and the PE expansion has to be essentially initiated, we believe, within 1 year. So taking that to the next level. There's other conversations that will have to ensue around funding and getting that off the ground. And really, we're going to wait and get a new athletic director on board and then start working on that as well. Not a very good answer, Trustee Erickson, but there's a lot of things at play yet within it. So there aren't specific funds budgeted within this budget for that construction project at this point.
It's an acceptable answer. But what I'm hearing is that we have to make some movement on the PE remodeling level 2 planning within a year from the authorization. Is that from when they authorized it at the state, or is that like July 1, 2015? When does the year begin?
It's a good question. I believe it's July 1. Is that correct? Or is it when they actually sign the bill?
It's when they sign the bill.
Oh, so it's actually April.
Well, you'll hear more from me.
Trustee Merrill.
Chairman Du Bois, when would you like our questions? Because I had some questions way back at the beginning of the book, but I didn't know if we were waiting till the end
Yep,
or.
she-
I
just
just
about-
asked the president, he said to go ahead with this one, but we'll wait now.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Okay, I'm almost done here.
No,
To wrap up, this entire budget, so this will be, all the funds that we've talked about, the unrestricted, the 1 mil, endowment, restricted and plant fund, actually it's a relatively flat budget. It's just a very slight decrease in the total. But we do believe, and for all the reasons that Dr. Schaefer mentioned earlier, that it does strike a balance between fiscal conservancy and aggressive investment. And that it does ensure a stable future, and it was developed through a collaborative and collective efforts across the campus. So now we're ready for questions.
I would just like to say before we take questions that if they are specific to certain figures, certain things, since this is the first reading, I think that we should limit questions to broad things. And if they're little specific things, they should be either call Jane or Carol and get answers rather than worrying about them tonight. I think our questions should be of a magnitude. That's my thought on the matter. Trustee Merrill.
Thank you. I don't know if this is a big question or a little question, but Brad and I agreed on this. On page 23, I can't find the innovation funds of $100,000. So maybe it's there, but hidden.
And I didn't bring my book up here. Innovation funds of $100,000. Are you looking at the 1 mil fund on page 23?
Yes, I am. I just couldn't find it, and maybe I just couldn't find it. Maybe it's there. Did you find it?
He didn't find it.
It's included in the,
It's hidden in another figure? Okay,
yeah, this is included in the instruction area,
okay,
the 275,000.
275. 276? Is that, am I in the wrong place? Okay, that explains that. It doesn't matter to me. But the other question I had, and Ed had this question as well, is on page 15. I'm wondering, and I think Ed was wondering, the project management coordinator for $71,000, is this a position that other community colleges have within their scope of employment?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Merrill, I do not believe that they do within Wyoming. There are a few other business analysts popping up at the Wyoming community colleges. Some of what they do could be coined as project management, but I'm not aware of them in Wyoming. As Dr. Bender has pointed out, they are becoming more prevalent in universities and colleges around the nation, though, to facilitate change. So it's a relatively new type of position, I think, for Wyoming. Yeah. And the personnel requests in here are salary and benefits, so it's 71,000 includes salary and benefits.
I think it's an important, I do think it's an important position, but we don't want to have the top position. That's been a complaint around our college that we have too many top positions and not some of the other positions that we need to fill.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Merrill, this position would most likely be classified as a professional staff. And it is true, the two places we have grown the most in terms of employment have been in faculty and professional staff. If you recall that presentation I shared with you a few meetings back. And in this budget, we'll add 3 new faculty as well as 2 professional staff as well. And so that's where they're at. But administrative numbers, as I've shared numerous times, have actually reduced over that same budget period. Same period.
Mr. Chair, I don't have a question. I have a request. Could we receive the PowerPoints that we don't have in the book?
Exactly.
That would be very helpful.
Provided it's not too large of a file.
Could we just get them next time?
I think most of them are in the book.
The PowerPoint slides have summarized what's in my memo and in the book, but for simplicity's sake, I think what Trustee Erickson is asking for, it just might be helpful as a resource or a reference.
Yeah, I'd like to put it in where they fit in the book.
Not all have copies.
Are there any other questions of the trustees? Trustee Kittle?
President Schaefer, you had talked just a little bit about the possibility of salary increases. that's a fair amount of discussion there, obviously. I would think one of the areas to look at, which you're probably gonna look at anyway, is the faculty and staff vacancies at 450,000 as one area. But I think the bigger question is the 7 community college presidents and the commission probably need to identify how best to deal with salary increases with the governor's office. If you do that, then we would maybe be looking at how best to move money around to take care of salary increases individually. But I think you got to reach some consensus as if you're going to go with the governor's office and the state legislature for salary increases, then possibly you got to stay with that approach and not do some creative moving funds around to do salary increases locally for individual and community colleges.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cato, a fair point. I wish I had a fair answer that would suggest that we've been able to come to consensus as the 7 campuses, and it's because we're each in different communities and different situations. There is considerable, I think, question about equity within the current biennia in terms of pay adjustments for educational employees between the university, certainly, and the community colleges and K-12. We have had, or at least I know that the president of the presidents, Dr. Young, has had interactions with the governor's staff. I know that Dr. Rose does as well. It has been past practice, to my knowledge, of the commission not to request or even really address the consideration about pay compensation plans, and rather we seem to fall in line with whatever the governor or the state proposes. And in fact, it's my understanding that going into this budget request, the commission will probably ask for a flat budget and, again, enrollment growth funding. And so we have had those conversations with the commission, but I don't think the commission will take a lead on compensation adjustments for the community colleges in the budget request. And I'm not aware of anything in the past where they have led that. Usually it comes out as either part of the governor's budget, overall budget picture, or has been happened as a result of the legislation. So I would agree with your position, but what I've learned and been advised that sometimes that very conservative approach doesn't yield the results we hope it would down the road. So, to say, and where we started this budget and put it together was, state pay plan. We don't want to be where we were at 2 years ago, where we go in and they say you were able to do it yourself. Why do we need to compensate it? But as other folks have pointed out, we still may get a pay plan even if we've done those things. And so the question becomes, is there a compelling reason to make those adjustments? And that's why I referenced the inflationary measures and the increases to our health insurance costs that employees will have to bear. So I'm up in the air on it, and that's one of the reasons I posed it to you. I would love to hear where the trustees land on that piece. And it's certainly something that you could think about, but the closer we get to June 30, the harder it's going to be to start making major movements within the budget proposal.
Mr. Chair, without a great deal of consideration of that particular issue, I think if I recall what you said, is that you have the capability within the budget for a 1% inflation increase. Also, a cost of living increase. Second, that there's our thoughts about having an incentive of 1% if certain criteria are met. On the face of it, that sounds reasonable. It also indicates that we're looking for ways to reward our staff. My question would be, is that across the board, or would that be essentially for instruction, academic, and institutional support, or would it be for all employees, including maintenance employees and the like?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, without actually getting into the details, I figured out how we've done it. What we have conceptually discussed is that it would not be a percentage, but rather a flat amount, and it would be across the board. One of the things we've really been trying to engender on campus is that each and every one of us has a role in helping students find their way to enroll at LCCC, to stay at LCCC, and complete their educational credential here. And it's one of those things we want to continue to do. Certainly the faculty spend a lot of time with their students in the classroom and have a significant impact on them. Advisors do as well, but everybody has a role in that. We want everybody to be engaged in that type of target. So what we discussed was $500. Everybody gets that. Certainly those folks that sit on the lower levels of the wage scales, that $500 is going to go a lot further at the higher end. But those are conceptual at this point. If we looked at incentive, I think we would end up with more of a flat amount than a percentage of a person's salary, just so we don't monkey with salary schedules and stuff like that. But instead actually put some type of success premium or success bonus at the end of the fiscal year. It'll take some discussion and we'll have to figure out how to do it, but that's sort of what we were thinking as a way to really get people to stay energized about helping more students complete. But as you pointed out, 1% certainly, I think we could find a way to make it work, certainly as a one-time bonus. I think there's ways we could work an adjustment that would actually move the cost, the salary scales 1% up. I think we could find a way to make that work. It just comes with some of those dangers. As Vice President Hoagland pointed out to me earlier, though, even if we don't, if one of the colleges does that, then basically that's how the things get played out in the legislature, and we believe that some colleges will. So regardless of how we move forward, there's going to be colleges, I believe, that will actually make adjustments across the board, and we'll have to navigate that with the legislative process regardless.
Are there any other questions regarding the first reading of the 2016 budget? Well, thank you very much, Carol and Jane and Joe, for your presentation. And we'll look forward to the second reading, which will be at our next meeting, or is it in the next? Mid-May. Okay. And if any of you have any questions, I know that you would be very happy to entertain them and explain them to them, as you always have been.
Mr. Chair, may I make a final comment before we move on?
Yes, sir.
As the treasurer, I asked, and I think I mentioned this earlier, I asked Dr. Joe if I could observe the budget process this year. And I attended the President's Cabinet meeting in January, and also had the opportunity to attend the College Council meeting in March. And both of those meetings were very helpful to me as not only a treasurer, but as a trustee. And I want to thank Dr. Joe and also the cabinet, and also the members of the College Council who saw me there and then wondered, why is he here? And I think I did pretty well and just observed. I had some thoughts, but I kept my mouth shut. And I found it to be very informative, and I'm pleased that I did that. And I would like to request at this time the opportunity to do it again next year. God willing.
You want to subject yourself to it again, Trustee Erickson, of course.
Brenda, are you still with us?
I am.
Well, good. We've just had a wonderful first reading of the budget, and I'm sure you'll get your copy so that you can have a look at it. Where are you?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Whereabouts are you?
Huh?
Where are you?
I'm in Riverton, and I just saw our esteemed board chair as I was leaving the Joint Judiciary Committee. He was in there with the Wyoming Community College Commission. We were in the same place, in the same building.
Well, good. Well, we miss you, and there was a whole pan of vegetable lasagna made special for you.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. And then I forgot that the meeting was starting early, too.
Well, we miss you, and good luck, and drive carefully when you come home.
Well, thank you. I hear the roads are terrible, so I'm glad I'm here.
Okay. We're going to move on, Brenda and the rest of you, with our president's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. You've heard me speak enough tonight. I just have three quick things I want to update you on and would ask some thought to. The first one, we were informed this week that our lovely marquees at both ends of the campus where the entrances are dying and the technology behind those is in dire need of change. Right now, those marquees are essentially a series of light bulbs that are triggered through, I think, an old, you'll appreciate this, Lee, an old DOS-based interface where we actually program what is shared up there. I have asked folks in PR to look at at where they're at. And right now, it seems that replacing them with new, I believe it's LCD technology, which would mean we could do a whole lot more with them, would cost about $75,000. And so our recommendation and conversation at cabinet is that especially if there's increased functionality, and of course, ensuring that the Department of Transportation is comfortable with what we do with those signs, that we would suggest keeping the marquees and actually upgrading them with that. But I wanted to just put that out for you. You don't have to give me feedback now if you don't want, but my plan right now is to bring a recommendation to you at a subsequent meeting for authorization to expend that out of year-end funds to actually upgrade the marquees. So that's one thing. The second thing, some of you know this, we were approached by Cheyenne Frontier Days to sponsor Frontier Days, and specifically they approached us with a unique sponsorship opportunity, and I don't want to let the cat out of the bag on what that is, but it's a unique opportunity to not only bring LCCC into the fold of sponsorship, but do it in an educational way that will touch many members of the audience over the 10 days there. But one of the things I just want you to be aware of is with that sponsorship, there's opportunities for engagement as well as different types of perks that we can provide to the faculty and staff and to the board. And there's opportunities for you to be involved in the activities. And so know that we're sponsoring it as we get that finalized and we get more details. I will come back with you with other ideas. And then
Trustee Merrill and I will sponsor you on a bowl.
On a bowl, thank you.
Aren't you already on one, Dr. Jones?
It seems to move quite frequently, yes, sir. The last thing I just want to update you, and again, and then we could have a conversation if you would like. We are, believe it or not, nearing the end of our third year with our law firm. Is that correct? 3 years already, Tara? 3 years. The current contract with our wonderful attorneys, it allows for us to do 3 one-year renewals. That basically will only take me saying we're going to renew them. My recommendation is that we exercise the first year for the annual renewal and of course continue to retain Woodhouse Road and Nethercott as I even got the name right for the first time. Great. As our legal firm for the college. And that's my intention. And again, would love to hear questions or thoughts if you have any on those things. And that, Mr. Chairman, is my report.
Thank you. Any comments from anybody with regards to our president's report?
Yes. Mr. Chair, for some reason, I forgot the first one. The comment you made.
Marquees.
The marquees. This may be a way out dumb statement, but does anyone read those?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
yes.
thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not one. I find looking at marquees that flip like that as distractions. And then while I'm driving, I choose not to look at those. So I got a response. I wonder if that's
I think it'd be
consistent.
money well spent.
Okay. I asked my question. The second part with the Frontier Days, that's super. My comment though is that going to come out of LCCC public relations money, or are we looking at? You stop. I'll stop. I won't ask the other part. You said yes.
Well, no, actually, it's a fair question. So as we entered into this, we're testing whether or not there's the value in doing that sponsorship as we've gone through it. Again, you'll hear me talk a lot about utilizing budget so we're not reactive in the way we utilize, but even going into the end of this fiscal year, because of where we had our adjunct budget, there will be year-end funds. And so what we've essentially agreed to is trying this relationship. So you won't see those expenses within your FY16 budget because we're going to try to do it. And then we'll actually see if the value's there, what type of leads it generates. Did we get students that had interest with it? What did it do for community relations? And then determine whether or not it's something we would want to actually perpetuate into the future.
Trustee Merrill and I can say this, that the hospital has sponsored, been a sponsor of Frontier Days for several years. And it is very valuable. And I think it's worth trying for a year. Like you just said, maybe in the end it won't, we'll find out it isn't, but it's wonderful communication and relations. It's like when the college and the hospital and all these other nonprofit things buy a table at civic functions. It puts you there in the front of the people and shows that you're interested in being part of the community, which we all are.
And to add on, if I may, Mr. Chair, we have a great rodeo program here. What better way for us to
That's right.
support our rodeo program than to sponsor one of the best daddy of them all rodeos in the entire country and the world? And then the third, I gotta say this because my right leg hasn't been hit yet, but I'm hopeful that we're going to be supportive of another year with this attorney firm.
All of us are, so that'll be not an issue.
I did say we.
Next, we'll have a report that was with Ed, but Carol is the designated reporter.
Well, actually, what I would like to report is about the evaluation, and I have received 7 of the 9 evaluations. So if Vicki could please remind the other folks who have sent the evaluations to me, I would appreciate. Yeah, no, just remind everybody, but I've received 7 of 9, I just am missing 2. So Ed and I are we're gonna go ahead and review from April 15th through May 5th, and we will give our report at the May 6th executive session with the results of the evaluation. And
Carol,
I'm sorry?
Carol,
Yes?
Carol, this is Brenda.
Yes,
I'm one of those you have not received yet. I'll get it to you.
thanks. We didn't need a confession.
No, I needed to confess.
Thank you. Okay, well, that'll be great, Brenda. We're gonna start working on it on Friday. Ed and I.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you. I do think at that same executive session, we will also recommend probably a salary, whatever we're gonna do with Dr. Schaefer's salary. So that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, under the board member updates, may I give a report on the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees meeting that was held today?
Yes, you may.
Trustee Mosier is there representing us in Riverton, and I listened in on the conference call. I won't go over all of what we discussed, but there were 2 main items there that I think are of import to this body. The executive director for WAC, Steve Bamer, has a new job coming forward. He'd be going to Florida. He'll be an executive director for some health organization there. It's a nice opportunity for him, and he'll be leaving, I think, the end of May. I may have that wrong, but I think the end of May. And so there's been a search for new candidates, and we had discussion today about his replacement and the approach to how they're going to deal with the selection and so forth. But there were some corollary items that came up. One is, since we're in a transition period, should we continue having the summit in the fall? And that led to a real healthy discussion. There were those of us who felt, well, we've got momentum with the summit. Let's continue doing it. What will we lose if we don't have it this coming year? Then there were others who I think were probably more practical than those of us who thought otherwise, that maybe a new person coming on will not be able to handle the task of putting together a top-notch summit, especially up in the northwestern part of the state, Cody. That discussion continued for probably a good 45 minutes. And a motion was made to continue the summit in October, and that failed on a 6-4 vote, so it was very close. So we will not have a summit this year as it now stands. I think if I were on the negotiating committee with the new executive director, I'd spend a little time with that individual and say, can you do this? You want this job? I think you can do it. But that would be my position. Another sidelight was, right now, it slipped my mind. But the fact that we did not have an April 1 meeting, our April 1 meeting was canceled. And so as a board, we did not have a collective discussion about a couple of items. Maybe Trustee Merrill can help me remember what was the second item.
It was the scope of the job.
The scope of the job, thank you. Whether the position should be split into two persons. One that deals with the legislative initiatives and the other with the management and the education responsibilities of the executive director. That didn't take too long to talk about. It was pretty much, in fact, it was unanimous, the search for one person to do both functions rather than to split those functions. Thank you.
Number 7, board policies, first reading. I'm sure you've had a
Now,
chance.
wait a second. You missed Finance and Facilities Committee.
I had Carol do that, didn't I?
No,
No,
Oh, is that you, Don? I'm sorry.
if I may. But
Yes.
Carol can join. We had our Finance and Facilities Committee meeting last week. Trustee Merrill and Trustee Mosier and I were present along with the administrative staff. We had one of the longer Trustee Du Bois, you probably would get after me for talking too much at the Finance Committee, but we had a long meeting. It lasted 2 hours. Fortunately, all 2 hours were very informative. We learned a lot. We were updated on a number of things. We had a full agenda. The agenda included the building forward updates. I was thinking we might get some updates today, so I'll go ahead and review some of my notes. The bid opening for we did have the wayfinding, and we're hopeful for having most of the construction completed in mid-August, except for around the buildings that in the areas where we're going to be putting our new buildings. The student center, 50% of the construction design were completed on April 10, and by mid-May, we probably have 100% construction design ready to get that out for bid. The Flex Tech, we have 50% of the construction design done and 100% expected by, I believe, a couple of weeks, no, pretty soon, because May 4, they're hoping to go to bid on that. Then we've heard about the level 1 approvals, the level 2 approvals for the learning and the commons, the teaching commons, the library. There's some juggling around, I guess, about the square footage. Maybe Dr. Joe could speak to that if there's any questions. And then I think the most exciting part that was new to me is the amount of work that the Fine Arts Task Force, or whatever we have titled that group to be, and Trustee Little is a member of that, along with Trustee Du Bois, and the two of you may want to add anything to what I might be saying. There's a prospectus that has been prepared, and I asked Dr. Joe if he could circulate that to all of us on the board. And it wasn't 2 hours later, and we all received it by email, and thank you. That's a very impressive document. The gentleman that put that together, I'm sorry, I don't recall his name.
Actually, that was our interim dean, Nicole Bryant of the.
Okay, the lady that put that together deserves really a round of applause. It's a very fascinating, appealing document. I don't do well reading on the monitor, but I went through it as well as I could, and I look forward to getting a hard copy, Vicki, if there's one available, because I read much better and I get more impressed when I can have it in my hands. But if the board members have not seen this, I encourage them to run through it.
I think it was sent to all of them.
Yes, it was. Yeah, but I'm not assuming yet that we've all had an opportunity to study it. Then we had a nice highlight of the budget preparation for this meeting, and I don't think we had any major questions that we asked at that time. Then we reviewed, and I'll hold that one back. Investment updates. There's going to be a change in the procedure to deal with our investments. The investment procedure that calls for, I believe, 18 months. I got to get the right phraseology here, but that when we make an investment, that we would be able to retrieve it within 18 months. Am I saying that correctly? And expand it so that there's flexibility to go for a 7-year period, given the certain type of investment and opportunity that the investors have for us. To date, about $1.5 million approximately of the $5 million that's available for investing has been, I believe, invested in some type of appropriate legal ordained by the state of Wyoming opportunity. I do have a question that came up after the meeting, and that is, how much of the $5 million are we going to maintain in liquidity for cash liquidity so that we can get it right away?
Trustee DuBois, Trustee Erickson, I don't have an exact amount as far as dollars. I think the percentage is, it's all reasonably liquid because that's the kind of investments that we can be involved in. But there will be some money market amounts, and I want to say 10%, but don't hold me to that. I'll have to look that up.
That'd be fine. I appreciate that. Thank you. Then the next item would be, I move for the approval of the financial statements and also the contracting and procurement report that we all have before us.
I so move. But I also have something I want to add on the investment updates. We're going to review them quarterly until the first of the year, and then we're going to review them semi-annual
Thank you.
for the minutes. Thank you. We need a second.
We need to vote on this.
We need.
Yep.
Don moved it,
I
you
seconded.
seconded.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Well, thank you very much, Trustee Erickson, for that good report. It was very thorough. Thank you. Now, I'm sorry that I didn't see it sitting there in front of me. So now we have the board policies, first reading comments. Is there any feedback to them? As I said, this is the first reading.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, it is your first reading. You've actually seen the board committee's policy as it originated from you. The other one is a student account automatic payment. They're relatively straightforward. We'll bring them back to you at your next meeting for second reading and my recommendation to approve.
Any further comments about them, either one?
Mr. Chair, this is only first meeting on the board committee policy. It seems like we've been discussing this for a while.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Erickson, it does seem like you've been discussing it for a while because it originated from you as the originating body. Typically, policies and procedures would originate from a group internally. At that time, your legal counsel advised you that should you want to exercise that right, that your first reading that you had now about a month ago, or the first time you actually talked about the changes, could suffice as your first reading. You could use this as your second reading and approve it if you wanted to, but I was following protocol, bringing it to you accordingly as your first reading.
Mr. Chair, is there someone in the chain of review that has not had the opportunity to see it? So then my question is there any reason why we couldn't approve it tonight?
It's not the proof, of course.
It's not the prudent. But is there, that
Let's
doesn't,
stick with
does-
her advice.
Let's stick with
Yeah, let's stick with that.
okay.
It's all right to go on, sir.
So you're
Yes.
money here tonight.
Ex officio trustee updates. First, Albany County. Cable.
Thank you, Chuck.
Oh, boy.
What?
He's going to the podium.
Okay.
If he wants to hear his voice.
Stick with the procedure.
Good job.
Mr. Chairman, fellow trustees, the Albany County campus had a presentation before the city council last night, in which Don Erickson, trustee Erickson, was there in attendance. Our chairman, Ed Mosher, also said a few words. I think it went very well. It was our request before the city council, to ask for their consideration of some land adjacent to the building there at a value that hopefully is a very attractive value to both parties, both to the college and to the city of Laramie. City of Laramie owns that land that our present facility is located in. And if you recall, in the last conversation we had, we're looking at the lots right behind the building, just to the east. And so it was our opportunity for, Dr. Mall made the presentation, Chairman Mosher made a few comments, and then we had, I made a few comments, and we had two staff members that did a great job, as well as two students. They got up and told their story about how they got to the Albany County campus and what the faculty and staff have done for them and their lives. And so for about 45 minutes, I think we wowed them. And it was, I think, a very, very moving presentation. And we're waiting on the appraisals to come back. We've had to hire, the city has hired an appraiser to appraise the lots. We have to start with that process in terms of what those lots are worth. And then we'll enter into discussions about what we can do to look at what the college can do for the community in exchange for getting a value for the land that is really affordable. So, it went great. Trustee Erickson was there last night. I thank you for making the trip over the summit. We appreciate your support. It always helps having the main campus support us. It really does. So,
Mr. Chair, can I comment? Butch, thank you. Boy, what the young people say these days, awesome. Awesome. That was an awesome meeting. The presentation, the organization of the presentation, the individuals that spoke, including Butch, they all said things that were very pertinent and very heartfelt and very true. And the comments that you made about the impact of the college on business and the community was really well received, I think, by the city council people. I was just so glad that I could be there representing LCCC and joining in on this very excellent presentation. There were a couple comments that were made during the council, by the council members, that leads me to sense something. And I think it was Councilman Hanson. He said, we handed out our strategic goals document, and he was reviewing that, or was it the master plan? Which one did they get? I didn't see it.
I believe the building forward plan.
The building forward plan. That's the one they got. Thank you. And he reviewed it, and as he reviewed it, he said, it looks like the expansion of the Albany County campus is already behind. Where are we going, so to speak? And so I sense if I were a counselor at the next meeting, it would not be unlikely for a question to come forward that might be something like this. Okay, we are going to give you a deal, whatever the deal will be. We hope it's going to be a real good deal, but whatever that deal will be, But then, how long is it gonna take before you do it? Before you do the expansion? Is that land gonna sit there for 5 years, 10 years? Is it gonna be moving in 1 year? I just sense that that might be a question that's gonna be asked, so I hope that we're prepared to look at what our options are for moving forward. Now, the next step is to get the level, okay, we got the deal, but now we gotta get the level 2 funding. Now, that's about an $800,000 operation, as I remember. Maybe it's less than that, but last year, was a year ago, January, that we were in Laramie, and we had the update, a very good update on that level 1 presentation. And then they indicated, okay, it's gonna be, what, 795,000 or something like that for level 2. So I just bring that to your attention. I sense that that might be a question that they'll ask.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, Trustee Erickson and Mr. Cadle, I think the two easy answers to those, whether they're the best answers or not, one of the reasons that it's behind is because we had two options that we modeled with in the Building Forward in the campus master plan. One was an expansion on the University of Wyoming's campus, and one was expanding at the current site. We invested significantly in time in exploring the university option, and I would say that's still very much on the table. And we continue to have those conversations. That's where the level 1 plan was for a building on the university campus. The university made that request for a level 2. Our level 2 planning has actually come in closer to about 250,000. So I think it's more. So the reason for the delay and behind is because we were really working with the university as the most viable early option for expansion. And now, as you know, they'll be searching for a new president. It's less tangible on how that may proceed, and which is why we've shifted to option 2, which is expansion at the current site. And the first piece of that is acquiring land. So the second answer to the question, and probably the easiest one without detail, is our Building Forward plan is through 2020. So that's really that target deadline of getting something moving and something working is that 2020 deadline. So 5 years, essentially. It's a relatively short time when we're talking about buildings, but those are the way I would sort of approach the two questions or the two answers if they come up again. But Butch, quick question, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Did we have members of the advisory board there, and did we have support in the audience, whether they were vocal or not?
I think we did. I mean, we didn't really rally, some of the advisory board members per se, but yeah, it was really an opportunity to present an LCCC story, and I think we did that very well, very effectively. We've got very little comments back from counselors. I mean, in my take, and Don's absolutely right, there's a few questions, but overall, though, there's a sense because we were able to lay such a good groundwork, what we've done in the past, when they went ahead and worked out this arrangement with us before, in 2004, to build a building on the land, that the amount of resources and scholarships and what we've done with city employees and so forth, just, yeah, it made for, yeah, we get it, how fast you want to move kind of thing, we're ready. Some of the counselors were saying, maybe another work session, let's get the appraisal. I mean, so I think they're bought in. Now we just need to hopefully lay out a very meaningful discussion about what kinds of services that the community would like to have, as well as what the city would like to have in a fair trade. And that might take a little bit of time, but well worth it. Any other questions? I mean, the college looked great. I mean, it really did yesterday. It was great.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Mr. Keenan Carroll, LCCC Student Trustee ex officio.
Thank you, members of the board. My report's kind of short. We just finished our SVAC fund presentations, and so next Friday we're planning on sitting down and deliberating on how we're going to allocate those funds to different clubs. And hopefully we should finish that on Friday, and all the clubs will know how much money they'll have to be able to spend next year. So that was our main thing that we've done recently. And if anybody has any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any new business to come before the Board of Trustees?
If not, I make a motion to move into an
No,
executive
no,
session.
no, we haven't.
Are we not done?
No, we have public comments.
Oh,
I'm
I'm so
sorry.
sorry. I'm very sorry.
We're not ready to adjourn, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Is there any public comment from anybody out in the audience? I'd like to mention Professor Schlitzky that the new Wingspan is a very nice paper. I read it this afternoon. Is there any other public comment? Is there a move to adjourn?
If not, I make a motion that we convene to an executive session for a personnel matter.
Is there a second?
Second.
Anybody objecting? We will have an executive session.
Is Brenda on the phone?
Hmm?
Is Brenda on the phone?
Yes.
Brenda, are you there?
Brenda?
Yes, I am.
Can I get everyone to actually vote randomly? Can we get an actual vote on the motion?
Oh, Brenda's, we're gonna have an
Yeah.
executive session. Do you vote in favor?
Yes.
So, the five of us that are here said yes.
The executive session will be held at CCI 121 across the hall.
Oh, okay.
Brenda,
Yes.
do you want me to call you from that phone over there? So
For
you,
the executive session?
yes,
Yes.
okay, I will do that. I will call you from that phone over there.
Okay, sounds good. You have my number, Vicki?
Yes, I do.
I put on
231-36.
Oh, are you so good?
Um,